The boardroom went completely silent when the billionaire CEO slapped her hand against the glass table and said, "Men are all the same." But what happened next made 12 executives stare at the single father standing near the door with a worn lunchbox in one hand and a child's crayon drawing in the other. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at the woman who had built a billion-dollar empire while quietly losing faith in everyone around her, and gave her an answer that would force her to question the one thing she thought she understood about people. If you believe kindness can heal what money cannot, forgiveness can change a life, hope can survive the hardest moments, and everyone deserves a second chance, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a meaningful comment, and subscribe to our channel so our family can continue sharing stories that remind us there is still goodness in this world. Vivian Harcourt had spent 20 years becoming the kind of woman people were afraid to disappoint. At 43, she was the chief executive of Harcourt Meridian, a technology and logistics company that operated across 3 continents. Her face appeared on business magazines, her speeches were quoted in corporate meetings, and investors trusted her instincts almost blindly. She could walk into a room filled with powerful men and make them reconsider decisions they had spent months making. She was intelligent, disciplined, elegant, and relentlessly controlled. What almost nobody knew was that her greatest strength had been built around one private wound. 7 years earlier, her husband, Preston, had walked out of their marriage after secretly draining a significant amount of money from a family investment account. He had promised he would return, promised he only needed time, promised he loved her, and then disappeared with another woman. Vivian had never forgiven him. More importantly, she had never trusted another man after him. Over the years, disappointment after disappointment seemed to confirm what she had already decided: affection was temporary, promises were convenient, and eventually everyone left when staying became difficult. That belief had hardened inside her until it became part of her personality. She treated warmth like weakness and vulnerability like a business liability. Her employees admired her efficiency but rarely felt comfortable around her. Even people who loved her carefully measured their words. On a bright Tuesday morning in early spring, Vivian was preparing to approve a major expansion when her chief financial officer informed her that the company had a serious staffing problem at one of its regional operations. A senior project manager had unexpectedly resigned, and several important client accounts were already behind schedule. Vivian demanded an immediate replacement. The human resources director presented several candidates, including a quiet operations specialist named Callum Reed. Callum was 38, a single father raising an 8-year-old daughter named Elsie. His resume was impressive but not polished. He had spent years working in logistics, warehouse management, emergency distribution, and community transportation programs. He had no prestigious university degree and no influential family name behind him. What he did have was an unusual record of solving impossible operational problems without humiliating the people who had caused them. He had also spent the previous 6 years raising Elsie after her mother left shortly after the child's 5th birthday. Callum never spoke bitterly about his former wife. When people asked why he had chosen to become the primary parent, he simply said that Elsie needed someone who would stay. Vivian initially rejected his application. She believed the company needed someone aggressive enough to handle pressure. But an hour later, Callum arrived for an interview because human resources had convinced him to come anyway. He entered the executive office wearing a clean but slightly faded navy suit, carrying a folder in one hand and a small red lunchbox in the other. Vivian noticed the lunchbox immediately and asked if he had another appointment afterward. Callum explained that he had promised Elsie he would meet her at school during lunch because she was presenting a science project that day. Vivian looked at the clock and told him that serious executives did not leave meetings for school presentations. Callum smiled politely and said that he understood, but his daughter had spent 3 weeks preparing the project, and he had promised her he would be there. He was willing to lose a job opportunity, he said, but he did not want his daughter to learn that promises mattered only when they were convenient. The words irritated Vivian more than she expected. She told him the position required total commitment. Callum looked at her steadily and said that commitment did not mean abandoning everything outside the office. It meant learning how to honor both responsibilities. Vivian ended the interview shortly afterward. Yet that afternoon, something unexpected happened. The company's largest shipping client threatened to cancel a multi-million-dollar contract because of repeated delivery failures. The executive team gathered in an emergency meeting, and every solution presented required expensive temporary measures. Callum, who had already left the building, sent a brief analysis to the operations department before going to his daughter's school. He had noticed a pattern in the delivery data during his interview. The problem was not the trucks. It was the scheduling system. Routes were being assigned according to distance instead of loading sequence, causing warehouses to sit idle while drivers waited. His proposed adjustment could solve the problem without adding a single vehicle. Vivian read his analysis while sitting at the conference table. She reread it twice. Then she asked her team to test the plan. By the end of the afternoon, the numbers began moving in the right direction. Callum was hired the following morning. During his first month, he proved himself without trying to impress anyone. He arrived early, worked quietly, learned the names of warehouse employees, and treated the cleaners, drivers, assistants, and executives with the same basic respect. He never stayed late simply to be seen. When his work was finished, he left to pick up Elsie. Sometimes he returned after dinner, but only when absolutely necessary. Vivian watched him closely, waiting for the inevitable failure she believed would come. Instead, the regional operation improved by 30%. But the real conflict began when Vivian assigned Callum to a high-pressure executive project involving a major European client. The project was already struggling, and Vivian warned him that failure would cost the company millions. Callum accepted the challenge, but when one of his team members made a costly mistake, he refused to fire her. Vivian was furious. She told him that weak leaders protected incompetent people. Callum calmly explained that the employee had made a mistake because she had been covering 3 vacant positions for weeks. He proposed fixing the workload rather than destroying the person carrying it. Vivian accused him of being sentimental. Callum replied that people were not machines, and a company that treated exhausted human beings like replaceable parts eventually paid for it. Something about that answer stayed with her. Several weeks later, the company held an employee appreciation luncheon. Vivian attended reluctantly, expecting meaningless speeches. Callum brought Elsie because the school had closed early. The little girl sat quietly beside her father, drawing pictures while employees ate. Vivian happened to glance at the drawing and froze. It showed a large building surrounded by tiny people holding hands. At the center stood a tall woman wearing a crown. Beside her stood a man holding a lunchbox. Vivian asked Elsie who the woman was. The child innocently explained that she was the boss lady who looks lonely. Vivian felt the words like a slap. Callum apologized, but Vivian stopped him. For the first time in years, she found herself unable to hide behind anger. She asked the little girl why she thought the woman looked lonely. Elsie shrugged and said that people who were happy usually smiled with their eyes. Vivian walked away before anyone could see her face change. That afternoon, she found herself remembering her marriage. She remembered the first apartment she and Preston had shared. She remembered believing that being loved meant being safe. She remembered the moment she discovered the empty investment account and the handwritten note he had left behind. But what hurt most was not the money. It was remembering how she had begged him to explain why he had betrayed her. He had looked at her without remorse and told her that she had become too difficult to love. For 7 years, Vivian had built a fortress around those words. She had convinced herself that if she never trusted anyone again, no one could hurt her again. Then one ordinary afternoon, a little girl had called her lonely. The turning point came during an important company presentation. A senior executive attempted to blame Callum for a delayed contract even though the delay had been caused by a decision made by the executive himself. Vivian watched the meeting unfold. In the past, she might have allowed the strongest person in the room to control the narrative. Instead, she asked for the original documentation. The records proved Callum had warned the team about the problem weeks earlier. The executive tried to shift responsibility again. Vivian stopped him. For the first time, she publicly defended an employee not because he was powerful, but because he was right. After the meeting, Callum found her standing alone near the windows, looking down at the city in the bright afternoon sunlight. She admitted that she had spent years believing men were incapable of loyalty. Callum listened without interrupting. She told him about Preston, about the betrayal, about how every disappointment afterward had seemed like evidence that she had been right all along. Callum did not tell her that she was wrong. Instead, he told her that what one person had done to her was not a law governing every person she would ever meet. He explained that his own daughter had taught him something after her mother left. He had wanted to become bitter. He had wanted to tell Elsie that people could not be trusted. But he realized that if he taught his daughter to expect abandonment, then the person who had left would continue controlling their lives long after she was gone. Vivian's eyes filled with tears. Callum told her that forgiveness did not mean pretending Preston had done nothing wrong. It meant refusing to let his worst decision become the definition of her entire life. For the first time, Vivian understood why Callum was different. It was not because he was a man. It was because he had suffered and chosen not to become cruel. That distinction changed everything. Over the following months, Vivian began changing in ways that surprised everyone around her. She stopped humiliating employees during difficult meetings. She started asking questions before giving orders. She introduced flexible scheduling for parents. She created a hardship fund for employees facing emergencies. She even apologized publicly to a manager she had once unfairly blamed. Her company did not become weaker. It became stronger. People worked harder because they felt valued. Teams became more honest because they were no longer terrified of admitting mistakes. Productivity rose, employee turnover dropped, and the company's reputation improved dramatically. But the greatest transformation happened outside the office. Vivian began spending time with Elsie and Callum. She attended one of Elsie's school presentations. She helped her choose books. She learned that Elsie loved astronomy, hated peas, and believed every dog deserved a ridiculous name. Callum watched carefully at first, afraid Vivian might eventually disappear like everyone else. But she kept showing up. One afternoon, Elsie gave Vivian a small handmade card. Inside was a drawing of 3 people standing beneath a bright blue sky. There was a father, a daughter, and a woman holding their hands. Vivian stared at it for a long time. Then she cried. Not because she was broken. Because she finally understood that she did not have to spend the rest of her life protecting herself from a past that was no longer happening. Months later, Vivian stood before the entire company during an annual gathering. She spoke about leadership, but her real message was about people. She admitted that she had once confused strength with emotional distance. She had believed that trusting others made a person vulnerable and that keeping everyone at arm's length was the safest way to survive. Then she looked toward Callum and Elsie sitting near the front and said that sometimes the person who changes your life is not the person who promises to save you, but the person who quietly reminds you that you are still capable of believing in people. Callum did not stand. He simply smiled. After the gathering, Vivian asked him whether he regretted taking the job. He looked at Elsie, who was laughing with a group of employees, and then back at Vivian. He told her that some opportunities look like jobs when they first appear, but sometimes they are actually doors into a completely different life. Vivian smiled through tears. The woman who once believed all men were the same finally understood the truth she had spent years avoiding. People were not defined by their gender, their wealth, their failures, or their past. They were defined by what they chose to do after life gave them every reason to become bitter. Preston had chosen betrayal. Vivian had almost chosen isolation. Callum had chosen kindness. And Elsie, without even realizing it, had chosen to remind them both that love could begin again. Before the story ends, ask yourself something deeply honest. Have you ever judged an entire group of people because one person hurt you? If this story touched something inside your heart, leave a meaningful comment about what you believe matters more, being hurt by the past, or choosing who you become because of it. Your words might give hope to someone silently fighting the same battle. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Because sometimes the greatest second chance does not come when someone else changes. Sometimes it comes when we finally decide that the pain behind us does not deserve to control the love, kindness, and hope waiting ahead.